The phone rang while I was sitting in the clinic waiting room, staring at a clock that had stopped at 3:10. I thought it was just another telemarketer. But when I saw Angela's name on the screen, my heart fluttered with the old, familiar ache that only a mother knows. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Mom, we're going to Europe tomorrow. I sold the beach house and your car. We needed the money. You'll get your share soon. Bye." Click. Silence. 45 years of motherhood ended with the hollow echo of a disconnected line. I sat there frozen, my fingers still gripping the phone as if I could hold her voice a little longer. Around me, the world continued, nurses calling names, someone coughing, the smell of disinfectant thick in the air. My daughter had just stolen my life, and no one even noticed. But instead of tears, a strange calm settled over me. Because something stirred in my memory, something I had buried the day my husband, Robert, died 6 months ago. My name is Antonia Brooks, and if you've made it this far, I'm glad you're here. Give this story a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far truth can travel, because the one I'm about to tell you tore through my family like a wildfire that refused to die. 3 days before his heart gave out at breakfast, Robert had handed me a sealed manila envelope. He'd said, "Keep it safe, Tony. Open it only when you're ready to know the rest." At the time, I thought grief had already shown me everything. But now, I knew he had been preparing me for this very moment. The nurse called my name. I barely heard her. The doctor said I was healthy for my age, good heart, strong bones. I nodded, pretending to listen. But my mind was already home, in the bedroom I'd shared with Robert for 45 years, thinking about the drawer where that envelope slept. By the time I stepped out into the gray Boston drizzle, I had made a decision. I would not call Angela back. I would not scream or beg. I would go home, open that envelope, and finally find out what my husband had been trying to protect me from. The bus was half empty. Raindrops streaked the windows, blurring the city lights into ribbons of gold and blue. I watched them pass, thinking of the beach house Angela had sold our summers there, the sand between Robert's fingers as he built bonfires for her birthdays, the way his old Ford pickup always smelled like sea salt and tobacco. Angela knew what that truck meant to me. She knew every story carved into that wood-paneled dashboard. And yet, she sold it for cash. When the bus reached Marble Glen, I stepped into the rain without an umbrella. The streets shimmered. The house looked the same, quiet, lonely, and filled with ghosts. Inside, I wiped my shoes on the old rug Robert hated, walked straight to the bedroom, and opened the dresser drawer. There it was, the envelope. Robert's handwriting, steady, deliberate, spelled my name across the front. Antonia. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside were several documents, deeds, certificates, and one letter, folded neatly. "My dearest Tony, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't protect you the way I wanted to. You always trusted too easily, especially when it came to our daughter. I never told you everything because I wanted you to live without worry. But know this, you are safe. You own more than you think. The beach house, the buildings, the accounts, they're all yours through a company in your name. Let no one make you small again. When the time comes, use what's yours with grace, not anger. Love always. Robert." I stared at the words until the ink blurred through my tears. The company name was R. Brooks Holdings, with my name listed as sole heir. Attached were property deeds across Massachusetts and a portfolio of investments that made my head spin. Angela had sold what she thought was the only thing left, never realizing I owned everything she stood on, including the apartment she lived in. As the rain tapped against the window, a strange, steady fire took root inside me. Angela believed she had erased me from her life. She had no idea I was about to rewrite both of ours. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with Robert's letter spread out before me, the ink shimmering faintly under the dim yellow light. Outside, the rain had turned to mist, and the soft hum of distant traffic was the only sound breaking the silence. For 45 years, Robert and I had shared everything except this secret. He had always been a quiet man, not secretive, but deliberate. Every word he spoke carried weight. Every silence had a reason. Now I understood. While I thought we were simply surviving, he had been building a fortress around me. The papers were immaculate. Deeds to 6 properties across Massachusetts, an apartment complex in Brookline, a modest motel near Cape Ann, a string of rental homes, and the beach house in Marble Glen. The stocks and certificates belonged to 3 companies I'd never heard of, but the values were breathtaking. For the first time in months, I whispered his name aloud. Robert, what did you do? He had predicted everything, even Angela's betrayal. In the final paragraph of his letter, he'd written, "If our daughter ever loses herself to greed, remember what you have is not just money. It's your independence. Don't use it to destroy her. Use it to teach her who she could have been. Teach her." Those words burned through my chest like a slow ember. At dawn, I dressed in my long gray coat, tied my scarf, and called Mr. Harold Peterson, the attorney who had handled Robert's affairs. He was the kind of man who always sounded like he was halfway through a chess game, polite, measured, and faintly amused by the world. "Mrs. Brooks," he greeted me gently, his voice crackling through the receiver. "It's been too long. How are you holding up?" "I'm ready to understand what Robert left behind," I said. "There are papers, things I never knew about. I need to see you." He paused. Then, in the tone of a man who'd been waiting for this call, said, "Come by tomorrow at 10. And Mrs. Brooks, bring everything." I hung up and felt something awaken in me that had been buried under grief purpose. Mr. Peterson's office was in an old stone building near downtown Boston. When I stepped inside the marble lobby, my reflection stared back at me in the polished floor. A small, silver-haired woman, in a pressed coat, clutching an envelope like a shield. He greeted me with warmth, but when he began reading the documents, his expression changed. "Mrs. Brooks," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. "Do you realize what this means?" "I'm beginning to. Robert didn't just leave you property. He created a web of investments under a holding company registered entirely in your name. You're the majority shareholder, the trustee, the beneficiary of everything. That includes—" He hesitated. "What?" I pressed. "The building your daughter lives in," he finished quietly. "It's yours, through a subsidiary of R. Brooks Holdings." The words hung between us. The same building where Angela had laughed, judged, and distanced herself from me for years. Mr. Peterson continued, "I can help you claim full control. We'll keep it discreet. No one needs to know yet." I folded my hands, letting the realization sink in. For the first time, I wasn't powerless. I could call the police, sue, expose them. But Robert's words echoed again. "Don't destroy her. Teach her." "No lawsuits," I said finally. "Not yet. I want everything transferred quietly back to my name, but I don't want my daughter to know. Can you do that?" He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "It'll take a few weeks, but yes, I'll handle it personally." As I left his office, a gust of winter air bit my cheeks. The city bustled around me, people clutching coffee cups, hurrying to jobs they hated. I walked slower than all of them, because for the first time since Robert died, I had nowhere I needed to be and everything I needed to do. Back home, I made tea and sat by the window. Across the street, Aurora Jenkins, my neighbor of 30 years, was pruning her hydrangeas, pretending not to watch me. She had always been kind but curious, the sort of friend who could sense a shift in the wind. That evening she knocked on my door. "Antonia, honey, I heard Angela's gone abroad. You doing all right?" I smiled the way widows are expected to smile, polite, brittle, hollow. "She needed a break," I said softly. "We all do." Aurora squeezed my hand. "If you ever need company, I'm just across the street. These empty houses can swallow a woman whole." I nodded, thanking her. But as the door closed behind me, I whispered to myself, "Not this one." That night, I placed Robert's letter in a frame and set it on the mantel beside his photo. The next morning, I began writing my plan in a small notebook. Page 1, reclaim everything quietly. Page 2, wait for Angela to come home. Page 3, show her what she's done. I didn't know how the ending would look yet, but I knew this. Angela believed she had taken everything from me. What she didn't realize was that she had just given me back my reason to live. The following morning dawned gray and sharp, the kind of Boston winter day that made every breath taste like iron. I woke before sunrise, not out of restlessness, but anticipation. The weight of the manila envelope no longer haunted me, it steadied me. Robert had left me the truth, and now I needed to turn that truth into armor. I brewed coffee the way he used to, strong enough to make my pulse quicken, and sat by the window, watching the light seep slowly into the street. The neighborhood was waking up, Aurora dragging her trash bin down the driveway, a delivery truck idling near the corner. It was an ordinary morning in Marble Glen, but inside me, everything had changed. At 10 sharp, I was back in Mr. Peterson's office. He greeted me with a warmth that couldn't quite conceal his curiosity. I handed him a small leather folder, neatly organized with Robert's documents. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, glancing through the pages, "I've started preliminary checks. Everything Robert left you is perfectly legitimate. He was meticulous." "That sounds like him," I said, allowing a faint smile. He leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together. "Do you know why he kept all of this secret?" I looked out the window at the stream of commuters below. "He said he wanted to protect me from worry." "Protect you, yes, but also from exploitation," Mr. Peterson said carefully. "Robert saw what Angela had become. He suspected she might one day see money as love's replacement." The words stung because they were true. My daughter had always been brilliant, charming, magnetic, everything I wasn't. But under all that brilliance, she had learned to measure affection in possessions. I had given her everything, and she had learned that giving meant ownership. "Tell me, Mr. Peterson," I said quietly, "can she touch any of this?" He shook his head. "No. Everything is in your name. The house, the apartment complex, even the building her husband Edward uses for his business, all under R. Brooks Holdings." I raised my brows. "Her husband's business?" "Yes. He's been operating out of one of your properties for the past 2 years, rent-free, as far as I can tell." The irony almost made me laugh. My daughter's husband had been profiting from me without even knowing it. The universe had a perverse sense of humor. "Then let's keep it that way," I said, my voice cool. "I want you to quietly transfer all direct control back to me. Title, management, accounts, everything. I don't want Angela or Edward alerted." "Not yet." "Of course," he said, scribbling notes. "May I ask what you intend to do?" I smiled faintly. "What every mother eventually does, Mr. Peterson. Teach her child a lesson one she'll never forget." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Robert would approve." "Would he?" I whispered. "I'm not sure. He believed in kindness. I'm beginning to believe in justice." That afternoon, I walked along the Charles River, bundled in my wool coat. The water shimmered like cold glass, and in the distance, the Prudential Tower pierced through a thin veil of fog. Boston had always been Robert's city, full of old bones and quiet dignity. It felt fitting that his secret fortune had been born here, unseen, unspoken, but enduring. As I walked, I rehearsed the performance that would soon define me. The world still saw me as the grieving widow, the woman who'd lost everything. And for now, that was exactly who I needed to be. When I got home, Aurora was waiting on the porch, her arms crossed, her nose red from the cold. "You've been out a lot lately," she said. "You're not doing anything foolish, are you?" I smiled, forcing warmth into my tone. "Aurora, the only foolish thing I've done lately is wear heels in winter." She chuckled but didn't look convinced. "You've always been too strong for your own good, Antonia. Sometimes people like us need to let others help." I thought of Angela's voice over the phone, that smooth detachment that had cut me in half. "You're right," I said softly. "But sometimes, Aurora, strength is the only thing that keeps a person from falling apart." When she left, I made myself a small dinner, tomato soup and toast, and ate in silence. On the table, Robert's letter lay beside my plate, the edges curling slightly from where I'd handled it too often. I touched his signature, tracing the loops of his R and B, and whispered, "You planned for everything, didn't you, my love?" Then I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Step 1. Reclaim all assets. Step 2. Keep the world believing I am destitute. Step 3. Wait for Angela to return." The wind howled outside as the first flakes of snow began to fall. I went to the window and watched the world turn white. Somewhere across the ocean, my daughter was probably sipping wine in Paris or Rome, believing she had outsmarted me. But she didn't know that the game had only just begun. 2 weeks passed. The first snow had turned to slush, the kind that made the streets of Boston glisten under the dull winter Sunday. Every morning, I went through the same quiet ritual: coffee, newspaper, a long walk through Marble Glen, pretending to live the small, invisible life everyone expected of a 71-year-old widow. But behind that calm facade, my world was shifting. Mr. Peterson called me regularly now, his voice carrying both excitement and disbelief. "Mrs. Brooks, I've completed the filings," he said one afternoon. "All 7 properties have been transferred under your direct ownership. The apartment complex where your daughter lives officially, you are her landlord." Her landlord. The words felt strange, electric. I looked out the window at the frozen street, watching children drag sleds behind them, their laughter faint through the glass. The world had no idea that a war had begun, one waged, not with screams or lawyers, but with silence and signatures. "Mr. Peterson," I said, "you'll keep my name out of the public records as long as possible." "Of course. I used a trust intermediary. No one will connect you to the company unless they dig deep." "Good. That's how I want it. My daughter thinks I'm surviving on her charity. Let's not ruin her fantasy just yet." He hesitated. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Brooks. Most people your age seek peace." I smiled faintly. Peace is for people who've already had their justice. That evening, as I stirred a pot of vegetable soup, the phone rang again. It was Aurora, ever faithful to her small-town gossip network. "Antonia, did you hear?" she began breathlessly. "Edward's in trouble with the bank. Something about unpaid loans. My nephew works in finance, and he says Edward borrowed against their apartment, but apparently the bank's discovered he doesn't actually own it." I bit back a smile. How unfortunate. Unfortunate? It's scandalous. Poor Angela. She must be losing her mind. "Poor Angela," I echoed softly. When the call ended, I stood by the stove, the spoon still in my hand, watching the soup bubble quietly. Robert had once told me that revenge was like salt. You had to use it sparingly, or it would spoil everything. But I wasn't seeking revenge. Not really. I was seeking truth, the kind that couldn't be bought or lied away. 3 nights later, I dreamed of Robert again. He was sitting in his armchair, wearing that old plaid robe of his, reading the Boston Globe. When he looked up, he smiled, his eyes twinkling behind his glasses. "It's time, Tony," he said. "Don't be afraid to show her who you are." I woke up with my heart pounding. The house was dark, except for the faint blue light of dawn creeping through the curtains. I got up, made tea, and opened the small notebook on the kitchen table. It was time for the next step. I called Mr. Peterson. "I want to send an eviction notice to apartment 3B at the Willowmere complex." He hesitated. "That's Angela's apartment." "I'm aware." "Mrs. Brooks, are you sure you want to start with this?" "I'm not evicting my daughter," I said evenly. "Not yet. But I want her to receive a letter, a warning that her lease is under review for unpaid financial obligations connected to her husband's loans. Make it look procedural, not personal." "I can do that." "And Mr. Peterson?" "Yes. I want the sender to be R. Brooks Holdings, no personal signature." He paused. "You want her to see Robert's name?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I want her to feel him again, watch him walk back into her life from beyond the grave." The letter was sent the next morning. By noon, the phone began ringing. I didn't pick up the first time, or the second. On the third ring, I answered. "Mom!" Angela's voice trembled through the line. "Did you know anything about this?" "I just got a letter from some company, R. Brooks Holdings, saying they're reviewing our apartment lease because of unpaid debts." "What's going on?" "R. Brooks Holdings?" I repeated softly, letting the name roll off my tongue like a ghost. "No, dear. I've never heard of them." "Mom, this isn't funny. Edward said he handled everything, but now this letter. God, I think the bank's involved. Can you lend me some money? Just a few thousand to cover legal fees until we figure this out." I leaned back in my chair, staring at Robert's photo on the mantel. "Angela, you sold my car, my house. You said I needed to learn to live smaller. I don't think I have a few thousand to lend." She fell silent. For a moment, all I could hear was her breathing, shaky, uneven. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm sorry about how I handled things. Please, just help me this once." It took everything in me not to soften. But Robert's words came back again. "Don't destroy her. Teach her." "I'm sorry, Angela," I said gently. "I wish I could. Maybe you should talk to the company that owns your building." "Who are they? Do you know them?" I smiled. "No, dear, but they sound familiar, don't they?" When I hung up, I felt the first sting of tears. Not from guilt, but from something deeper, the ache of a mother who had finally stopped rescuing her child. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was re-education. A week passed. The frost melted from the windows, and February sunlight crept timidly across the hardwood floors. The quiet of my house had grown heavy, thick with waiting. I knew it wouldn't be long. Then, one morning, Aurora appeared at my door, cheeks flushed from the cold and eyes wide with gossip. "Antonia," she said, lowering her voice as though we were conspiring. "She's back." I didn't have to ask who. "Angela," she went on. "I saw her at the station. Alone. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Aurora." That afternoon, the phone rang again. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom." The voice was brittle, stripped of the arrogance it once carried. "Mom, I'm home." "Are you?" "Yes. Edward stayed in Europe. He said he'd send money, but—" Her voice cracked. "He's gone. I think he's with someone else. I didn't know where else to go." For a moment, I said nothing. I let the silence stretch between us like a mirror. Then I softened my tone. "Come home, Angela." She hesitated. "After everything I did to you?" I said, "Come home." When she arrived that evening, I barely recognized her. Her once perfect hair was tied back messily, her coat wrinkled, her face pale and thinner than I remembered. She carried only one suitcase, the kind you pack when you don't plan to return. "Mom," she began, her voice breaking. "Come in," I said simply. She stepped into the hallway, her eyes darting around as though the house might reject her. The faint smell of cinnamon and wood polish hung in the air. Everything looked the same, yet her presence made it unfamiliar. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded, setting her bag down carefully. Her hands trembled when she lifted the cup. "Mom, I don't know where to start. Everything's gone wrong." "Start with the truth." She swallowed hard. "Edward's gone. He lied about everything, the business, the trip, the loans. He left me with his debts, and now the bank is after me. The company that owns our apartment are Brooks Holdings. They sent an eviction notice. I don't even know who they are." I watched her carefully. "You didn't know Edward borrowed against the apartment?" "No. He told me it was paid off. He forged my signature on some of the papers, Mom. I didn't find out until last week. I was so stupid." Her voice cracked again. "And then when I called you, you were right. I shouldn't have sold the house. Or your car. I thought I was helping us." "Helping us." I almost smiled. The lies we tell ourselves to justify the things we destroy. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "Angela, sometimes we help people in ways that hurt them, and sometimes we hurt people in ways that help them." She looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "You'll understand soon." That night, after Angela went to bed in her old room, I stood outside her door, listening to the soft sound of her crying. The same room where she used to plaster posters of bands and dream about Paris now held the wreckage of her marriage. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something deeper sorrow mixed with grim satisfaction. This was the lesson beginning to take root. The next morning, over breakfast, Angela spoke first. "Mom, I'm sorry for everything, truly. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to make things right. Then you'll have to start from the ground up. I already have. I got a part-time job cleaning offices downtown. It's all I could find." I nearly dropped my spoon. "You? Cleaning offices?" She blushed, ashamed. "It's not much, but it's honest. I can't rely on anyone anymore. Not after Edward." That admission, the first unprompted act of humility I had ever heard from her, landed like a benediction. "Angela," I said quietly, "you can stay here until you get back on your feet. No rent, no debts. But there's one rule." She straightened. "Anything. You don't get to run anymore. You face what you broke, and you rebuild it piece by piece." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I will, Mom. I promise." As she spoke, the morning sun caught her face, and for a moment, I saw the little girl she had been, the one who used to chase seagulls at the beach house, who believed her father hung the moon. Robert would have been proud. But I wasn't done yet, because love, when it's real, doesn't stop at forgiveness. It teaches, and I was about to give my daughter the hardest lesson of her life. The days that followed passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. Angela kept her word. Every morning, she left before sunrise to clean the downtown offices, returning with red hands and tired eyes, her once manicured fingers rough and chapped from scrubbing floors. It was humbling to watch, and even harder to admit that this version of my daughter, stripped of pretense, stripped of pride, was finally beginning to resemble the woman I had hoped she would become. I never once mentioned money. Not the inheritance, not the company, not the power sleeping under our roof. And Angela never asked. She believed we were both poor, two widowed women surviving off Social Security checks and leftover soup. Each night, after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing Mr. Peterson's updates. The legal restoration of my assets was nearly complete. Every property, every share, every account quietly returned to my name. The web was whole again, though Angela still thought we lived inside its broken threads. One evening, while cleaning the attic, Angela found a small wooden box. It was covered in dust, tied with a faded blue ribbon. "Mom," she called from the stairs, "look what I found. It has your name on it." My heart skipped. I hadn't seen that box in decades. Robert had sealed it the week before his heart attack, muttering something about keeping old memories safe. "Open it," I said, pretending calm. Inside lay a stack of photographs: Robert in his youth, Angela as a child, our old dog Daisy, and beneath them, a small sealed envelope. My name was written across it in Robert's familiar handwriting. Angela frowned. "Another letter from Dad?" "Apparently so." She handed it to me carefully, her eyes searching my face. I hesitated, then broke the seal. A single key fell into my hand, small, silver, slightly tarnished, and a folded note. "Tony, if you're reading this, then Angela has found it. This key belongs to the safe deposit box at Boston Central Bank, Box 217. Inside, you'll find something that might help her one day, when she has lost her way. You'll know when to use it. Love always, Robert." Angela leaned closer. "A safe deposit box? What's inside?" I ran my thumb over the cool metal key. "Your father didn't say." "Can we go tomorrow?" she asked eagerly, her tone, for the first time in months, carrying a spark of hope. I studied her face. Beneath the fatigue, the bruises of regret, I saw the faintest glimmer of the curious little girl who once used to sit on Robert's lap, asking endless questions about the world. "Yes," I said, "tomorrow." The next morning, we took the bus to the Boston Central branch. The ride was silent. Angela stared out the window the whole time, her reflection pale against the glass, as if she were half in this world and half in another. When we arrived, the bank manager, a polite man with gray hair and soft manners, escorted us downstairs to the vault room. The hum of the air conditioning echoed faintly, mingling with the click of keys and the metallic whisper of drawers sliding open. Angela clutched my arm. "Mom, my hands are shaking." "That's because you know this matters." The manager opened box 217, set it on the table, and left us alone. Inside was a small velvet pouch, a thin folder of papers, and another letter. Angela opened the pouch first and gasped. It was full of jewelry, not costume pieces, real ones. Gold bracelets, pearl earrings, a diamond brooch I'd never seen before. Each piece shimmered like it had been waiting patiently for this moment. "Mom, these must be worth thousands," Angela whispered. I opened the folder. Inside were old appraisals, insurance documents, and a brief note written in Robert's careful hand. These pieces were never for sale. They belonged to Antonia, but if Angela ever forgets the meaning of worth, let these remind her that value lies not in ownership, but in what we choose to protect. Angela sat back, overwhelmed. "He left these for us." "For you," I corrected gently. She shook her head. "I can't take them. Not after what I did." "Then don't think of it as taking. Think of it as understanding." On the bus ride home, she held the pouch on her lap, staring down at it as if it were something fragile and alive. "Mom," she said softly, "if I sell these, I can pay off Edward's debts." I turned to her slowly. "Would that make you free?" She hesitated. "It would help." "Angela," I said, "freedom doesn't come from paying off a debt someone else created. It comes from understanding why you let them create it." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. For the first time, she didn't argue. That night, after she went to bed, I sat by the window with the velvet pouch beside me. The city glowed faintly in the distance, 1,000 lights flickering like unspoken truths. I opened Robert's note again and read it slowly, savoring the weight of each word. He had left her the tools to save herself, but he'd left me the burden of deciding when to let her use them. And as I held the cool jewelry in my hands, I finally understood what he had meant when he wrote, "You'll know when to use it." Not yet. Not until she truly saw herself. The next morning dawned pale and brittle, the kind of morning where even the light felt thin. Angela sat at the kitchen table, her hands folded over the velvet pouch as if it might vanish if she let go. The air smelled faintly of coffee and quiet dread. "Mom," she said finally, her voice low, "I think I should sell some of the jewelry, just enough to pay the banks and clear Edward's name from mine. I can't live like this with letters piling up and calls every day." Her words were cautious, almost rehearsed, as though she was asking permission. I studied her carefully, the same way Robert used to study a chessboard before moving a single piece. "Do you think that's what your father would have wanted?" "I don't know," she admitted, her eyes filling with a desperate sort of honesty. "But I can't sleep. I see those debts everywhere I go. They feel like ghosts following me." "Then maybe it's time you face them," I said softly. She frowned. "You're not angry?" "I'm not angry, Angela. I just want you to understand that selling gold doesn't make you rich, it just makes you lighter. But sometimes, being lighter isn't the same as being free." She looked down at the pouch, her fingers tightening around it. "I just want to breathe again." Over the next few days, I watched her move with quiet determination. She made lists of debts, organized bank statements, met with loan officers. It was strange to see her so grounded. There were no designer clothes, no champagne laughter, no Edward whispering in her ear about investments. She even began cooking dinner again. Simple meals, the kind we used to share when Robert was alive. Lentil soup, roast chicken, fresh bread that she kneaded with clumsy hands. Each night, after cleaning up, she'd sit at the kitchen table, hunched over her spreadsheets, muttering figures to herself. The tapping of her calculator became a lullaby that filled the silence Robert had left behind. And then, one night, I found her crying. She didn't hear me approach. I just stood in the doorway, watching the way the lamplight touched her hair, the same golden brown I once brushed every night before bed. "Angela?" She startled, wiping her eyes. "Mom, I didn't hear you. What's wrong?" "I sold some of the jewelry," she confessed. "Just a few pieces, enough to pay the first round of debts, but when I handed them over, it felt wrong." "Wrong?" "It felt like I was selling him," she whispered. "Dad, you, every Sunday morning, every Christmas dinner, every good thing we had." Her voice cracked on the last word. And suddenly, I saw not the woman who'd betrayed me, but the little girl who used to cry when her father left for his late shifts at the bus depot. "Angela," I said gently, sitting beside her, "you didn't sell him, you honored him." She shook her head. "No, I sold his faith in me, and I don't deserve to have any of it back." "Maybe not yet," I said quietly, "but you're learning." 2 weeks later, she returned from the bank with a small envelope and a tired smile. "The worst of the debts are gone," she said. "We can finally breathe again." "We?" I asked, arching a brow. She hesitated, then laughed softly. "Old habits. I guess I still think of everything as ours." There was something genuine in her tone, something I hadn't heard in years. Gratitude. Not the shallow kind that people use to soften guilt, but the kind that grows out of humility. That night, while she slept, I called Mr. Peterson. "Mrs. Brooks," he answered, his voice groggy but alert. "It's late. Everything all right?" "Yes," I said. "Better than all right. It's time." "Time for what?" "For Angela to learn the rest of the truth." He was silent for a long moment. "Are you sure she's ready?" "She's broken, Harold, but she's no longer blind. That's enough." "I'll prepare the documents," he said. "But Mrs. Brooks, she may never forgive you for keeping this from her." I smiled faintly. "Then she'll have learned her final lesson: real love doesn't always come wrapped in comfort." The next morning, I found Angela sitting on the porch, watching the pale light rise over the neighborhood. She looked peaceful, almost weightless. "Morning, Mom," she said. "I was just thinking about Dad." "Were you?" "Yeah, about how much he worked, how he never complained, how he always said money was just a tool, not a goal." She smiled sadly. "I think I finally get it." I nodded. "Then you're ready for what comes next." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I handed her a folded piece of paper. "Mr. Peterson wants to meet with us tomorrow. There's something you need to see." Her brow furrowed. "Is it bad?" "That depends," I said, rising from the chair. "On what kind of woman you decide to be." She didn't ask another question. She just sat there, staring at the paper in her hand, the morning sun turning her hair to gold. The same gold she had once sold to pay for her mistakes. The same gold her father had left behind so she could find her way home. Tomorrow, she would finally learn that the greatest fortune she'd ever had wasn't buried in a vault or locked in a safe. It was sitting across from her every night, quietly waiting for her to see it. The next morning was unusually warm for late February. The frost had melted overnight, leaving the street slick with puddles that reflected the gray Boston sky. Angela dressed carefully black slacks, a beige sweater, and the small pearl earrings she had kept from the jewelry pouch. I noticed she didn't wear them out of vanity but reverence. "Ready?" I asked. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I don't know why, but I'm nervous." "You said this isn't bad news, right?" I smiled softly. "Not bad, just overdue." Mr. Peterson's office felt different this time. The first time I'd walked in, I was a widow, confused, fragile, desperate to understand what Robert had left behind. Now, I entered as a woman with purpose, her steps measured, her silence deliberate. Angela sat beside me, her eyes darting around the polished wood and brass nameplates like a child waiting for her report card. Mr. Peterson greeted us with his usual courtesy, but there was a distinct gravity in his expression. "Mrs. Brooks, Miss Brooks, I appreciate you both coming." "Of course," I said, "let's get to it." He adjusted his glasses, opened a folder, and began sliding documents across the desk. "Miss Brooks, before we start, I want you to know that everything I'm about to show you is legal, legitimate, and has been in place for years." Angela frowned, glancing at me. "Legal? What are you talking about?" He handed her the first document, a property deed. Her name wasn't on it. Mine was. She blinked. "This is the building Edward and I lived in." "Yes," Mr. Peterson said. "Technically, it has been under the ownership of R. Brooks Holdings for more than a decade." "R. Brooks Holdings," she repeated, her voice hollow. "That's the company that sent me the eviction notice." "Yes," I said gently, "it was your father's company, and now it's mine." She turned to me slowly, her face pale. You own that building?" "I do." He handed her another folder, bank accounts, investments, shares in quiet partnerships across New England. Each paper was a brick in a foundation she never knew existed. This can't be real," she whispered. "All this time, you had money, properties. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me suffer?" Mr. Peterson looked between us, then discreetly excused himself, leaving the room heavy with silence. I waited until the door closed behind him before speaking. "Because you needed to see who you were without it," I said quietly. "You needed to understand what life looks like when love and comfort aren't bought." Her eyes filled with tears, anger, and disbelief twisting together. "You lied to me." "No," I said softly. "I protected you, just as your father protected us. When you sold my house, my car, our memories, you believed you were taking everything from me. But what you really took was the illusion that love could survive without respect." She shook her head. "Mom, I was scared. Edward said we were drowning in debt. I thought I was helping." "I know," I interrupted gently, "and maybe that's what hurts the most. You didn't do it out of hatred. You did it because you'd learned to value convenience over conscience. Because the world made you believe that love without money was failure." Her tears spilled freely now. "You could have stopped me." "I could have," I admitted. "But then you wouldn't have learned. You wouldn't have gone to work at that office, or faced those creditors, or realized that strength doesn't come from inheritance, it comes from humility." She covered her face with her hands. "You wanted me to suffer." "No," I said firmly, leaning forward. "I wanted you to wake up." The room fell into stillness, broken only by the soft ticking of the brass clock on the wall. Outside, a car horn honked in the distance, the world continuing as if it hadn't just shifted under my daughter's feet. After a long moment, Angela lowered her hands and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since her return. "Dad knew this would happen, didn't he?" "Yes," I whispered. "He saw the distance growing between us long before I did. That's why he left me the letter. The money wasn't a gift, it was a test." She laughed bitterly through her tears. "And I failed." "No," I said. "You stumbled. And then you learned. There's a difference." We left Mr. Peterson's office without another word. The sky had turned soft and blue, and for a moment, I could almost feel Robert's presence in the warm breeze that brushed my cheek. Angela walked beside me in silence, clutching the folders to her chest. When we reached the corner, she stopped. Mom? Yes? I don't know if I can forgive you yet. I nodded slowly. That's all right. Forgiveness isn't owed, it's earned. She took a deep breath. But I understand why you did it. That was enough. That night, Angela didn't sleep. I could hear her pacing through her old bedroom, the creak of the floorboards following her thoughts. At dawn, she knocked softly on my door. Mom, she whispered, I've been thinking. I want to stay, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I want to rebuild something real, from the ground up. I smiled in the dark. Then you've already begun. When she walked away, I looked at Robert's picture on the nightstand. She's finding her way back, I murmured. You'd be proud of her, of us. Outside, the first light of morning spilled across the horizon, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel like the beginning of another battle. It felt like the beginning of peace. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, just a stillness that hummed with everything unsaid. Angela kept to herself at first. She spent long hours sitting on the porch, reading through Robert's documents again and again, as though searching for an apology hidden in the fine print. I let her. Some lessons don't need lectures, they need silence. Every so often, she would ask me a question in passing. Did you really know about all the investments? Was Dad planning to tell me? Why didn't he trust me? And every time, my answer was the same. He trusted who you could become, Angela. He just didn't know how to reach her yet. She would nod quietly, not ready to respond, but slowly, the edge in her eyes softened. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen sorting through the jewelry she hadn't sold. She'd polished each piece until it gleamed under the light. Mom, she said without looking up, I'm going to buy them back, every one of them, piece by piece. That could take years. I know, she smiled faintly, but it's not about the gold anymore. It's about owning the right to keep them again. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Your father would be proud of that answer. She laughed softly. You sound like him. Maybe I've finally learned to. That night, over dinner, she surprised me. Mom, I've decided to go back to school, she said, twirling her fork absent-mindedly. I don't know for what yet. Maybe social work. Maybe something that helps people like me, people who thought love and money were the same thing until life proved otherwise. That's a hard lesson to turn into a career, I said, smiling gently. Maybe that's the point, she replied. I studied her face, the calm, steadiness, the humility that had taken root where arrogance once lived, and for the first time in years, I saw my daughter, not the woman the world had made her. A few days later, Aurora stopped by with a basket of muffins and gossip, as she always did. I heard your Angela's back at it, she said, working again, studying, walking around with that old sparkle in her eyes. She's finding her way, I said, setting down my teacup. Aurora said, leaning closer. And you? Have you forgiven her? I hesitated, then smiled. I don't think forgiveness happens all at once. It's like learning to breathe again after you've been underwater too long. Each breath gets a little easier. Aurora reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're a stronger woman than most, Antonia Brooks. No, I said softly. I'm just a woman who finally stopped trying to fix everything and started trusting that time could do what I couldn't. That evening, Angela came home early. She carried a small brown paper bag and a single lily in her hand. Mom, she said, placing the flower in a vase. I stopped by the cemetery today. I froze. You went to see your father? She nodded. I told him everything. About Edward, about you, about what I've done and what I'm trying to become. I swallowed hard. And what did you tell him last? She smiled through her tears. That I finally understand what he meant when he said love isn't about giving people what they want, it's about giving them what they need. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint tick of the kitchen clock and the whisper of the evening wind brushing against the window. Finally, Angela reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, she said, her voice trembling. Thank you for not rescuing me. Thank you for letting me fall. I squeezed her hand. You didn't fall, Angela. You landed exactly where you were supposed to. That night, as the house settled into silence, I found myself standing at the window again, looking out at the soft lights of Marble Glen. The world had a way of circling back, of stitching together what we once thought was lost. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something we gave once. It was something we practiced every day, like faith or breathing or love. And in that quiet moment, I whispered into the dark, "She's home, Robert. Our girl's home." Spring came early that year. The air softened, the snow melted into rivulets that carved tiny paths through the garden, and the lilac bush Robert had planted 30 years ago bloomed with more color than I remembered. The house no longer felt haunted, it felt lived in again. Angela spent her mornings outside now. She'd traded her cleaning uniform for jeans and gloves, kneeling in the soil with a patience I'd never seen in her before. Every so often, she'd glance up at the sky and smile for no reason, as if each cloud carried a quiet apology. One Saturday afternoon, I stepped outside with 2 glasses of lemonade. She was sitting on the grass, hands dirty, hair pinned loosely, humming a tune Robert used to whistle when he mowed the lawn. "Careful," I teased. "If you keep working like this, the neighbors might think I've hired a gardener." She laughed a real, unguarded laugh that I hadn't heard in years. "Maybe I'm just making up for lost time." "Maybe you are," I said, handing her a glass. "You've done a fine job of it." She looked around the yard at the newly planted tulips, the freshly painted fence, the wind chimes swaying from the porch. "This house feels alive again, doesn't it?" "Yes," I said softly. "So do you." That evening, while we were putting dinner on the table, Angela spoke with quiet determination. "Mom, I've been thinking about the beach house." I froze. The beach house, once the crown jewel of our family, the heart of every memory, and the place she had so carelessly sold. "What about it?" "I want to see it," she said. "I want to fix it up, the way Dad would have wanted. Not for me, for us, for him." I studied her face. There was no trace of manipulation, no hint of entitlement, just humility. A kind of reverence I thought she'd lost forever. "Angela," I said gently, "do you even know who owns it now?" She met my eyes and smiled faintly. "You do, don't you?" I said nothing, but she didn't need confirmation. Her eyes shimmered with quiet understanding. "I'd like to go there," she said. "Even if it's just once. I want to see what I threw away." We drove down to the coast the following morning. The sky was the color of slate, and the air carried that familiar salt tang that clung to every memory of our summers there. When the ocean came into view, Angela's breath hitched. The house looked almost unchanged, white paint peeling from the shutters, a faint sway in the old wooden porch, and the seagrass bowing in the breeze. But to me, it had never looked more beautiful. Angela stepped out of the car slowly, her eyes wide, her voice barely a whisper. "I remember this smell. I used to think the air here tasted different." "It still does," I said. "It tastes like home." She walked up the porch steps, her fingers tracing the railing as if it were a relic. "You fixed it, didn't you?" "After I sold it." "Yes," I said quietly. "Mr. Peterson helped me reverse the sale. You were right about one thing, though your father's investments made it possible." Angela turned, tears blurring her eyes. "You did all this, and you still let me believe I'd ruined everything." "I needed you to feel the weight of what you'd lost," I said gently. "Otherwise, you'd never have learned how to protect what mattered." She looked away, toward the horizon where the ocean kissed the sky. "I think I understand now." Inside, everything was exactly as we'd left it. The photographs, the old furniture, even Robert's fishing hat still hung on the wall. The silence was thick with memory. Angela wandered from room to room, touching the walls, pausing at every photo, every trace of our life. When she stopped by the dining table, she whispered, "I don't deserve to sit here." I walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then earn it, one day at a time." She turned and hugged me. Not a hesitant, guilty hug. This one was fierce and full, the kind of embrace that roots forgiveness into the bones. That evening, we sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky burned gold and violet, and the waves shimmered with light. Angela spoke first. "Mom, when Dad died, I thought I'd lost my compass. But maybe it just took me this long to realize you were the compass all along." I smiled faintly. "He and I built it together, you know. I just had to learn how to use it after he left." She rested her head on my shoulder. "Do you think he can see us?" "I think he's been watching this whole time." And in the fading light, I could almost hear Robert's voice in the wind, low, steady, content. "You did well, Tony. You both did." That night, when we returned home, Angela placed a small photo of Robert on the mantel beside his letter. "He deserves to watch over us from here," she said. I nodded. "So do we." For the first time, the house didn't feel divided by secrets. It felt like a home again, stitched together by truth, forgiveness, and the quiet strength that only loss can teach. Tomorrow, we would begin something new. But tonight, we were exactly where we needed to be. The following months unfolded like the slow turning of a page. What had begun as quiet mending became something larger, something alive. Angela started visiting the beach house every weekend, restoring it plank by plank. The peeling paint was stripped away, the shutters were repainted robin's egg blue, and the scent of sawdust and sea air became the perfume of our redemption. Each Saturday, she brought fresh flowers for the porch table. Sometimes lilies, sometimes daisies, the kind Robert always said made the house feel less like property and more like a prayer. One morning, I drove down early and found her sanding the old porch rail, humming under her breath. She looked up, wiping sweat from her brow, and grinned. "You're early," she said. "I was afraid you'd start without me." Angela handed me a brush and a bucket of paint. "Then grab a brush, boss. We've got an empire to rebuild." I laughed, dipping the brush into the paint. "Empire? That's a bit dramatic, don't you think?" She smiled. "Well, every empire begins with a roof that doesn't leak." By late summer, the house looked almost new again. But what mattered wasn't the paint or the polished floors, it was the way Angela moved through it. She no longer flinched at old memories. She lingered in them, honored them, carried them carefully, instead of running from them. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching the tide creep closer, Angela turned to me, her voice quiet but certain. "Mom, I've made a decision. I want to turn this house into something more." "More?" "A refuge," she said. "For women who've lost everything like I did. For those who think they're broken beyond repair. We could use it to help them start over. Just a few rooms at first, maybe part of the foundation Dad left behind." Her words made my heart stutter. "You want to turn our family home into a shelter?" "Not just a shelter," she said, "a beginning." I thought of Robert, of his calloused hands building this porch plank by plank. I thought of the long nights I had spent wondering if Angela would ever understand the meaning of what we'd built. And now, here she was, offering to open our doors to strangers, to give our pain a purpose. "Yes," I said finally. "Let's do it." Angela exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for years. "You really mean it?" "Of course. The best way to keep something alive is to share it." That fall, the first woman arrived, a quiet, timid soul named Mariah, with a bruised cheek and a suitcase no bigger than a grocery bag. Angela greeted her at the door with the same words she once heard from me. "You're safe here. You can stay as long as you need." Watching her speak those words, with that same soft strength, filled me with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. Over the next few months, more women came, each carrying her own story, her own version of loss. Some stayed for weeks, others only a few nights. But every single one left the house lighter than when they'd arrived. The local paper even wrote about it. The Brooks Foundation for Women in Transition. I'd never imagined our name in print again, not after everything. But when I saw the headline, I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. One chilly November evening, Angela and I sat by the fire, the sound of the waves just beyond the windows. The beach house was warm with laughter from the women in the other rooms, soft, tired, grateful laughter that sounded a lot like healing. "Mom," she said, staring into the fire, "I used to think I was cursed, that losing Edward, losing everything, was some kind of punishment. And now? Now I think it was mercy. Life stripped away everything false, until all I had left was the truth. You, Dad, this house, the chance to begin again." I smiled, my throat tight. Mercy often feels like punishment before it feels like grace. Angela nodded slowly. "You're right." She turned to me, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "You saved me, Mom. Not by giving me money or comfort, but by giving me the space to fall apart and the strength to stand again." I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You saved yourself, Angela. I just held the light long enough for you to find it." Outside, the ocean whispered against the shore, carrying the same rhythm it always had. I thought of Robert, his laughter, his steady hands, his quiet faith in the long game of life. He had trusted me to guide her home, even when the road was cruel. Now, she was no longer my wayward daughter. She was my partner in something greater than both of us. We had built a legacy not of wealth, but of understanding. Not of possession, but of grace. And for the first time since his death, I felt the weight of his absence lift, replaced by the warmth of something eternal. That night, before bed, Angela placed a small brass plaque beside the front door. It read, "The Brooks Haven, founded in memory of Robert and Antonia Brooks, for those finding their way home." When I saw it, my heart broke in the gentlest way possible, because this was what love looked like when it had finished surviving. It built things, it healed things, and it forgave everything.